Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming to the Greater Triangle Commuter Rail presentation this evening. We are so excited that you're here and looking forward to a great event. I'm Wendy Mallon. I'm the marketing manager at GoTriangle. And before we get started, we're going to take care of a few housekeeping items. First of all, you've probably noticed that all of you are going to be muted this evening. We had a tremendous turnout for this presentation this evening. And so in light of that, we have everyone muted. You can use the Q&A feature. You should see that at the bottom of your screen to be able to submit questions anytime during the presentation. You may not see your question once it's submitted, among other questions that are submitted. So once you submit that question, we will see it. You may not see other people's questions. So please feel free to continue doing that. So don't think you're the only person submitting questions. We do encourage you to submit those questions throughout the presentation so that we can get to as many as possible by the end of the presentation, because we have over 500 people that have signed up for this event. We're super excited to take those questions and hopefully get to as many as we possibly can. So please submit those questions as they come to you, and we look forward to answering those at the end of the presentation. Questions submitted will be addressed by the panelists at the end of the about a 33-minute presentation. The panelists you'll meet towards the end of this during the live Q&A portion. Any questions that we are unable to get to for whatever reason, time constraints or things that we need to follow up on, we will be sending out an email with those answers, those Q&As after this event. This presentation does also include simultaneous interpretation in Spanish. You should have had the option to choose Spanish as your language of choice when you signed on. And there will be a survey at the end of this session containing demographic questions. I think there's only 4 questions. We ask that you please answer those questions. It will help us ensure that we are reaching all representatives of the region. So we would appreciate it if you would please fill that out. You will have a second chance to do that. There will be a survey or an email that will come out after this presentation that will give you another opportunity to do that as well. Finally, because of the incredible turnout that we have tonight, we did pre-record the presentation part of this. We promise you we are all in our respective rooms here, looking forward to speaking live in the Q&A at the end of this, but we did pre-record in the interest of time and bandwidth, hopefully issues. So the next part of this will be pre-recorded, but we will look forward to, at the end of that, working through your questions, talking with you, and answering those in the live Q&A. So the next part of this is going to be, we're going to start with a video, and then we're going to have a word from our GoTriangle CEO, Chuck Lattuca. Before we get started, I am going to introduce Lisette. She is going to be our interpreter, and she's going to have a few words for our Spanish-speaking folks that are with us tonight.
Thank you, Wendy. Bueno, muy buenas noches a todos los que se han unido con nosotros esta noche. Bienvenidos. Les queremos dejar saber que esta presentación va a ser de estar disponible con interpretación simultánea al español. Entonces, si ustedes están interesados en escuchar en español, lo que tienen que hacer es a la parte de abajo de la pantalla inferior derecha, van a encontrar un icono de un globito. Ese icono del globito tienen que seleccionarlo y apriétenlo y haga clic ahí y va a salir interpretación. Cuando salga interpretation, language interpretation, va a decir en inglés. Luego van a salir las opciones de los idiomas y entonces hay que hacer clic donde dice español si desea escuchar esta presentación en español. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you, Wendy.
You. Thank you, Lisette.
My pleasure.
Hello, my name is Charles Lattuca, and I'm the president and CEO of GoTriangle. Most people know us as a bus transportation agency. However, we're also a planning agency. And right now, we're planning to study commuter rail for the Greater Triangle region. The region needs more transit options. We can't build our way with highways out of our traffic congestion problems we have today. People are moving to the Triangle area, and over the next 10 to 20 years, that's going to add up to a lot of new cars on the road. Through the whole Triangle region, we have the North Carolina Railroad, and that provides us an opportunity to explore how we could build a rail system in that right-of-way that already exists and provide new transit services to customers. The commuter rail is going to cover a wide geographic region, from the city of Durham all the way out to Clayton and Johnston County, and points in between, including Research Triangle Park, Morrisville, Cary, NC State, Raleigh, and Garner. Commuter rail makes a lot of sense for the region. It's going to provide a quick and reliable transit option for folks. It's going to be on rails, and it's not going to be impaired by everybody else that's making their commute to work. The area of study for the commuter rail is up to 43 miles. If we build the commuter rail in the Triangle region, we'll increase people's opportunities to reach jobs in healthcare and academic institutions by a factor of 10. Commuter rail is going to maintain the region's economic competitiveness. It's going to maintain the region as a good place to live, a good place to build a business, or a good place to relocate your business to. It's very important for GoTriangle to plan and build new transit options to better serve the region, to ensure the region's economic opportunity and quality of life. On behalf of GoTriangle and all of our partners working on the Greater Triangle Commuter Rail study, I want to thank you for being here this evening. This transformative project will become the spine of a new regional transit network that will serve the future needs of Wake and Durham counties. Johnston County, the fastest growing county in the state, has recently joined the study and may also become part of the rail transit network. Over time, we expect future expansions of the commuter rail network to also serve Orange County. A new rail service will also be integrated with planned bus rapid transit projects and local urban bus expansions that will occur over the next several years. This project builds on the state's investment in the North Carolina Railroad corridor. The North Carolina Railroad opened for service more than 165 years ago, and it remains a vital part of our transportation network, carrying 50 to 60 freight trains per week and more than 10 passenger trains daily. The commuter rail project will run within the North Carolina Railroad corridor, taking advantage of the existing tracks, bridges, and stations, and providing access to the Triangle's major job centers, universities, and healthcare centers in the process. GoTriangle is leading the feasibility study under an agreement signed with our regional partners in the spring of 2020. Why are we studying commuter rail? Because more than 600,000 people will be joining us in the Triangle over the next 2 decades. We cannot build our way out of congestion with more lanes on our highways. Triangle residents need a reliable, cost-effective transit choice other than to drive alone in their cars and sit in ever-increasing traffic. We will never be able to maintain our status as one of the best places to live and work in the United States without transit alternatives to ease the gridlock. We've created this animated video to illustrate the situation.
The Triangle is booming, and for good reason. Our region is among the best places in the country to call home. With our top-tier universities, hospitals, and growing employment sectors, it's easy to see why. More than 1.6 million people live in our region, and more than 600,000 more are expected to join us over the next 20 years. More neighbors mean more cars and more traffic congestion. More lanes won't fix the problem. We need another option. The commuter rail line, as planned, would have stops in Durham, Research Triangle Park, Morrisville, Cary, Raleigh, Garner, and possibly Clayton. With commuter rail, people will be able to get to jobs, healthcare, and schools across a large swath of the Triangle. In fact, a Triangle study found that commuter rail would be faster and more reliable than commuting by car or bus. The commuter rail would follow along the existing North Carolina Railroad Company corridor, allowing us to build our transportation future upon an investment that has already been made. Commuter rail will provide access and opportunity to new and existing jobs all across the Triangle. More than 7,500 people are expected to take the commuter rail each day. A trip from Durham to Raleigh is projected to take less than 50 minutes. That means less time stuck in traffic, fewer greenhouse emissions, and a boost to the quality of life in our region. Johnston County has joined the current study phase and is evaluating whether to extend the many social, environmental, and economic benefits of commuter rail into Clayton. The current study phase is expected to last through 2021. Getting community feedback every step of the way is an important part of the planning process. Find out more about the project and how you can have your voice heard at readyforrailnc.com.
So now that we've seen why we need commuter rail, let's take a look at how the current project came to be and where we are now. I'm Liz Raskoff, and I'll be walking us through an overview of the project, and based on feedback from earlier surveys, we'll be reviewing what a typical station could look like. The commuter rail has been recognized as a desired addition to our regional transit network, beginning with the concept's inclusion in the transit plans, which are funded by transit taxes passed in Durham in 2011 and Wake in 2016. In 2018, we started to move the concept of commuter rail into the study phase. The current feasibility study is looking at the technical details of how the project could work, including rail analysis related to stops, locations, and schedules, as well as opportunities the rail could provide to Triangle residents, such as access to affordable housing and jobs. Finally, this current feasibility study involves educating the public about what we're studying and providing input opportunities. The Greater Triangle Commuter Rail project proposes to use existing railroad tracks, as you saw in the recent animation. This means building inside a corridor that is already in place. As you can see in this map, the gray line is the existing rail corridor that runs through the triangle, with the orange indicating the proposed service of commuter rail. And this means it would run on the same rails as freight and intercity rail, including Amtrak, which you may be familiar with. And to maximize our current resources in the triangle, it would be shared with those services. Before we take a look at the proposed stations along the commuter rail corridor, let's talk about what a typical commuter rail station could look like. We'll go through a series of examples of the types of features the commuter rail would include. And keep in mind that at this time, all the information we're presenting is proposed and subject to change as more details are developed in the project. If you've never ridden a commuter rail and aren't familiar with the type of service we're talking about, here is a good example of a typical commuter rail station. You can see there's a platform to allow people to access the train. There is covered shelter, access from the street, or local parking, as well as typically you would see seating, real-time arrival information, and there would be easier boarding options for people with mobility issues or those pushing strollers and luggage. A typical commuter rail station would feature a platform adjacent to the tracks with canopies overhead to protect from the elements, as shown here. Signage would identify the direction of the service, often indicated by the final stop. For instance, Wantagh in this photo from the Long Island Railroad system in New York, as well as the track numbers indicating which direction you'd be going. Signs also provide that real-time information about the train's arrival and departure, and is used to direct passengers to bus and street connections from that specific station. In the Triangle, we have lots of great greenways, bike lanes, and bus routes already in place that would complement this service. And so signage at a station would indicate to passengers which direction to go in order to access those other networks. For stations where passengers need to get from one side of the tracks to the other, a pedestrian overpass provides a walkway, including elevator service on each side. As you can see, this photo also shows a safety feature in this fencing that is provided in between the tracks. In addition to those overhead walkways, with another example here on the left, some stations provide underpasses to go below ground for passengers to access the platform from a parking lot or getting dropped off by a bus or riding their bike. We get a lot of questions about how parking would be provided at the commuter rail stations, and most proposed stations would include what's called a park and ride option. So the idea is you drive to the station and leave your car for the day or a few hours, and you return via the rail. So these photos show some examples of the proximity of a park and ride lot to the rail stations and the tracks, and each specific station's parking options would be developed on a case-by-case basis. While fares are also something that would be determined later on in the project's development, at a typical commuter rail station, vending machines for tickets are located at the entrances to the station, as well as distributed on or near the platform. Safety is a big priority at commuter rail stations. So here you can see an example of what's called the yellow warning strip on the bottom left photo, which includes raised bumps so that you have a physical indicator as well as the yellow line to tell you you're at the edge of the platform. We also would include cameras to add security, and typical stations would have emergency phones for individuals or responders to use, as well as on the right bottom photo, you can see the types of crossing and fencing that protects people from entering the tracks. So now let's talk a little bit more about some of the aesthetic elements of a typical commuter rail station. Lighting is an important part of safety, accessibility, and the aesthetics of the rail station. And there are many options when it comes to incorporating lighting into the canopies, as well as adjacent areas where passengers might need to walk to and from a parking lot or a bus stop. And finally, if you've used the bus system in the Triangle or driven by some of our shelters, you may have seen how art has been integrated into transit options, even already in the Triangle. And here's some examples of how art can be used to complement a commuter rail station. So there are ways to incorporate art into seating, railings, backgrounds, as well as the shelters. And there are numerous ways to bring this kind of element into the design of a station and make it attractive and pleasant to be around. So now that we learned a little bit about a typical commuter rail station, what I would like to do is introduce Brigetta Wheeler, our public relations manager, and she will walk us through the proposed stations along the corridor.
Good evening. I'm Brigetta Wheeler, the Public Relations Manager at GoTriangle. And first I'm going to tell you about some supplemental studies that we have been doing this year, in addition to the technical studies. Because when we're investing in transit, it's also important to know how much affordable housing is near the proposed station so that we can make sure our low-income neighbors are well served. We want to know how much businesses would benefit from having a wider net for employees. We want to know what would happen economically as far as personal incomes or our gross regional project, i.e. our return on investment. So what we've learned so far from these studies is that this is a great corridor for transit that will increase access to jobs, healthcare, and other opportunities for almost everyone. You know, in most places, commuter rail systems are built to bring people from the suburbs to job centers downtown, but as we all know, the Triangle is a unique place in many ways. We have world-class universities and hospitals and job centers spread all along the corridor, where people are going not just for amazing educations and healthcare, but they're getting to work there. So first we were going to talk about the travel market analysis. This study isn't quite finished yet. You can be looking for the results soon, but it looked at where workers live, where residents work, and how the Greater Triangle Commuter Rail project would help those in modest neighborhoods get to key job centers. Some of the key findings of that study: 30% of all jobs in the Triangle Commuter Rail counties are within a mile of this corridor. So that's big. Of all the primary jobs in the 3 counties that pay less than $40,000 a year, those jobs that pay less than $40,000, 23% are within the corridor. And the travel analysis also found that 8 of the top 10 job centers in the Triangle are in the rail corridor. So that's also pretty big news. And that includes the innovation hub of Research Triangle Park. Here's another little factoid that's kind of interesting: is more than 96,000 people live in Durham County and commute to the other to work. That's the largest number of cross-county commuters in the state. This study also looked at which neighborhoods have the most significant presence of people of color, lower income households, households without vehicles, and legally binding affordable housing. TJ Cogg, who did this study for us, calls those reinvest neighborhoods. And on this slide, you can see that the yellow parts are the reinvest neighborhoods. The blue parts are job centers, and the purple parts are places that are job centers and where reinvest neighborhoods are. We found out that 70,000 people live in these reinvest neighborhoods that are completely or partly in the corridor. So the rail would help low-income triangle neighbors, and especially those without cars, access more opportunities. So one of the other things we looked at had another study completely on affordable housing, to see what sorts of affordable housing already exists in the rail corridor, to see where there are opportunities to build more affordable housing. Some of that is legally binding, meaning that it will always be affordable housing. Some of it will have to create new regulations and policies to keep it that way, but now we'll be able to see where we need to look at developing those policies. So we also found that 27% of existing affordable housing in Wake, Durham, and Johnston counties is within a mile of the corridor. And in Durham, that percentage is 37%. So 37% of Durham County's legally binding affordable housing is in our rail corridor. So let's go on a tour of the station areas that we are studying. It's important to know that these are all still preliminary. The current studies will help us determine, which stations are the most viable and where to put them is the best for everyone. So these aren't exactly where they're going and not exactly everything, but we're going to go ahead and look at what we're studying, so you'll know that what it is that we're studying. It's also important to know that, when we look at these stations and we see what all we can access from these stations, that, once this commuter rail is built, there will also be bus rapid transit corridors. There will also be a greatly expanded bus network. We'll have on-demand service. So what the transit network will look like when the commuter rail is built, it'll be built out to access all of the rail stations. So the things that we say that are near these stops, that you can anticipate that there will be greater transit to get you where you want to go once you get there. So the first stop is the West Durham stop, and that is the important western terminus of the rail lines. It'll have ample park and rides in anticipation of people coming from farther west, like Greensboro, Burlington, Alamance, Mebane, to ride to the eastern points in the commuter rail line. But West Durham is also a very important destination for the rail line too, because that's where Duke is. And Duke is the largest employer in Durham County and the second largest in the entire state with 22,000 employees. So this is a very large place where people will want to go. Also accessed from this station is the VA Center. Almost 70,000 veterans in North Carolina are enrolled at the Durham VA. And it also has 3,400 employees. And there's another little interesting factoid that 1,000 of those employees are veterans themselves. So at this station, you also will be able to connect to Go Durham routes. It's close to the 9th Street dining and shops. And as we said earlier, the station is also both a major Triangle Job Center and a reinvest neighborhood. So next we have downtown Durham, and Lord knows I don't need to sell the things in downtown Durham. So many fun things to get to. It connects to Durham Station, where you can catch Go Durham and Go Triangle buses to local destinations. You can also catch a mega bus there, I don't know if you know that, to various cities in the country. It's within walking distance to Brightleaf Square, American Tobacco Campus, Durham Bulls, DPAC, and Durham government offices. It connects to greenways and several greenways it connects to. So you'll be able to take your bike or ride when you get there and do other fun things. And there are more than 300 affordable housing units within this station area. So that's another important thing to note. So in East Durham, you can get to NC Central University, one of the preeminent HBCUs in the country. You can connect to Durham Tech here, which also serves Orange County students as well. You can connect to multiple Go Durham bus routes that'll take you almost anywhere in Durham. And it will include a park and ride lot for East Durham residents so that they can easily access the commuter rail line to get to other points in the Triangle. And there are also more than 500 affordable housing units within this station area. Now, Ellis Road has a lot of potential for planning development that takes advantage of being close to transit. We like to call that transit-oriented development. So this is a really good spot where elected officials and planners will be able to take advantage of building near a transit stop. It also connects to the northern point of RTP, where housing is rapidly increasing. And there are more than 650 affordable housing units within this station area. So then we go to Research Triangle Park. I don't know how many people know that we're going to relocate the Regional Transit Center to a spot near the RTP station here. So that means that this stop will connect to transit going every which way when it opens. We expect to work with RTP businesses to determine the best ways to connect employees from the station to get to the offices in RTP. Right now, we have an RTP Connect on-demand service that gets people from the RT Center to right to their front doors at RTP. So I imagine things like that will also be available then. And you can also get to the RTP Frontier, which I don't know if you've been there, but it's a really cool place to go visit. So then we get to Morrisville. And the number one question that we get is, why doesn't the commuter rail go to the airport? And the answer is, it does. Like a lot of major cities, the actual station won't be at the airport, but we'll have all sorts of, we're working with the airport to figure out the best ways to shuttle people from the stop to the airport. One of the main reasons it doesn't go to the airport is because we're building the commuter rail line inside the existing NCRR corridor. And that corridor just doesn't go to the airport. So, to be cost effective and to be good stewards of the public's money, it just makes sense to use this Morrisville stop and shuttles and any other wonderful things to get people to and from the airport. Because right now we're also using shuttles to get people to and from the airport. So it wouldn't be a big difference. So then we get to downtown Cary. Lots of fun things in downtown Cary that I've been to. Studies show that this will be a major destination by 2040 because of development opportunities and office buildings that will connect right to the station. Cary is also building a multimodal center where you'll be able to catch Go Cary buses, Amtrak, GoTriangle buses. One of the bus rapid transit corridors is supposed to go to the downtown Cary station. So lots of connections can be made here. And there are lots of bike and pedestrian connections here as well. Now, Corporate Center Drive and Blue Ridge Road, one of those station areas will have a really large park and ride facility. We don't know which one yet. That's kind of in the middle of the line so that you can park there and go west to Durham or east to Garner and get where you would need to go. At Corporate Center Drive, you can get to the Wakebed Soccer Park, which a lot of people go to. And there are also more than 750 affordable housing units in this station area. But the Blue Ridge Road station area, you could access NC State Fairgrounds, NC State College of Veterinary Medicine, PNC Arena, Carter Finley Stadium, and Merida College. So lots of places to be gotten to from the Blue Ridge Road station. And you can also catch several Go Raleigh routes from this station. So that, well, lots of connections. And then next we have NC State. So to be able to connect people to the largest university in the state of North Carolina, right in the middle of the campus is pretty big. It's not just a major education destination, but a major employer. In 2019, the enrollment there was 36,000 students. And NC State has more than 9,000 employees. So that's a lot of people who could be taking advantage of a commuter rail line and not sitting in traffic to get to NC State. People trying to get to NC State from the west can park in West Durham and ride. And from the east, they can park in Clayton, Auburn, or Garner and ride. And then at NC State, you can also connect to Wolf Line bus routes. I don't know if you know this, but anyone can ride Wolf Line bus routes, and it's always free. And you also have access to Pullman Park and the Village District jobs and shopping from this station. And then next you get to downtown Raleigh, Raleigh Union Station. Raleigh Union Station is a destination unto itself. It's just gorgeous in there. To connect to major downtown Raleigh employers, Red Hat, Cisco, state, all the state government buildings. So this is another big one. The downtown Raleigh universities, including St. Aug's and Peace and Shaw. You can connect to Amtrak here, Red Hat Amphitheater, the Convention Center, Dorothea Dix Park, the state museums. This eventually will include the Russ Bus facility. Russ Bus is the Raleigh Union Station bus facility. We call it Russ Bus. That will have Go Raleigh routes and GoTriangle bus routes. So you can connect directly to other transit from the station. And there are also more than 700 affordable housing units within this station area. And then we get to Southeast Raleigh, the Hammond Road station. This will also be a major park and ride for those coming from the east and needing to travel west to Raleigh, Cary, or Durham. The station area is both a major job center and is a reinvest neighborhood where also be a great place for people who need some greater access to opportunities to hop on the rail line to get there. And then we have downtown Garner. So all the great things in downtown Garner and a park and ride lot for Garner residents using the rail to head west. There are more than 300 affordable housing units within this station area. And then we have the Auburn station slide. You know, the original plans for the commuter rail had it going from West Durham to Garner. based on studies and feedback and lots of things going on, we're probably extending it to Auburn now and possibly even to Clayton. At the Auburn station, it might be the eastern terminus, or we might end up going to Clayton. That's still up in the air. But there should be a large park and ride lot here for people coming from the east headed west. Great, this is another one that has great potential for transit-oriented development, to take advantage of that quick hop on to transit to get anywhere in the triangle. This would also have easy access from US 70 business, I-40, and the future NC 540. And I think the Amazon distribution center is close to this too as well. And then the Clayton station is still, being studied as far as what makes the most sense of where to put it. There are so many great places to access in Clayton. It's a major employer center with Caterpillar and Novo Nordisk. And it also would be very convenient to NC 42, US 70 business, and the future I-42. And I think the Johnston County Workforce Development Center is also would be accessed from a station in Clayton. So our earlier studies show that riding from end to end of the commuter rail project from West Durham to Garner would take under an hour. The current studies will tell us more about how long it would take to get from West Durham to Auburn or West Durham to Clayton. So those aren't times that we really have yet, but anything's better than sitting in traffic probably. So there you go. And now I'm going to send it back to Liz, who's going to tell us what happens next. Liz.
Thanks, Brigitta. That was a great overview of the current proposed corridor and the stations. So you may be wondering, now that you know all this about commuter rail, what it could look like, where it could go in the triangle, what happens next? So the current study phase should indicate whether the project is technically, financially, legally, and politically achievable. If so, the governing bodies, local elected officials and leaders would then vote on whether to proceed with the project and apply for entrance into the federal capital investments grant pipeline to help pay for up to 50% of the project. So if approved, the project would advance into an application for federal funding, and construction could start as early as 2025. So what can you do in the meantime? Before we transition to our live Q&A to answer more questions about the project, just want to remind you all where you can find more information and stay up to date about the current phase of study and all the new findings that Brigitta alluded to. We have a great resource at readyforrailnc.com, which includes an interactive station map, the animation you saw tonight, as well as transit talks with rail providers across the country. So if you haven't done so yet, definitely sign up to join the Commuter Rail Insider List. And next, I will turn it over to Matthew Clark to conduct our live question and answer with the project team.
Thanks, Liz, and good evening, everyone. My name is Matthew Clark, and I'm project coordinator in the Department of Planning and Capital Development at GoTriangle. We have three great panelists with us this evening to answer your questions, and at this time, I'd like to take a moment to let them introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Katharine Eggleston. I'm Chief Development Officer at GoTriangle. I oversee and support our planning and capital development, or design and construction teams here at the agency.
Heikes, Senior Transportation Planner with GoTriangle, providing support on the commuter rail project.
You know, someone had to be muted. I'm Monica Barrow. I work for a company called STV. We're the consultants for the study. We work directly for GoTriangle and perform all the planning and conceptual engineering.
Thanks, everyone. Now let's get to the questions. Thank you all so much for your patience as we answer these questions. There are quite a few of them, and there is some overlap. Any questions that we don't get to tonight, we will follow up on. And the first question goes to Jay Heikes. Jay, how is GoTriangle planning for the commuter rail to serve RDU Airport?
Excellent question, Matthew. And as Brigetta mentioned, the top question we get. So the commuter rail will have stations both in Morrisville and in RTP. And it's anticipated that from either one or both of those stations, we would have a shuttle bus that connects to the commuter rail platform and then drops you off at the doorstep of either Terminal 1 or Terminal 2, depending on where you're going. This is pretty similar to how shuttle buses integrate with commuter rail systems, both at Baltimore Washington International Airport, as well as Boston Logan Airport. So it's a cost-effective and quick way to get from terminal to the rail platform.
Thanks, Jay. Next up, we've got two questions for Katharine Eggleston. Katharine, can you talk a little bit about how much the transit tax revenue brings in every year and some of the things that it's spent on, including commuter rail?
Sure, absolutely. So across Wake, Durham, and Orange counties, the dedicated half-cent sales tax for transit and the associated other registration fees and vehicle rental tax generates about $150 million a year. And there are transit plans in each of the three counties that direct how those funds are spent. A significant portion of those funds are spent to support expanded bus service in the three counties, as well as supporting bus infrastructure projects, improved bus stops, bus speed and reliability improvements. In Wake County and Orange County, some of the funds are being spent currently to advance bus rapid transit projects that are sponsored by the City of Raleigh and Town of Chapel Hill. And then we also have some of the funds set aside for future planning. So future planning for potential expanded bus rapid transit, as well as this commuter rail study that we're talking about this evening.
Thanks, Katharine. I've got another one for you. How is GoTriangle working with Norfolk Southern Railway to ensure that commuter trains will be allowed to operate in the NCRR corridor?
Sure. So for a commuter rail project like this, that's intended to be within a shared corridor where there's Class 1 freight railroads already operating, intercity passenger service already operating, it's really critical to have buy-in from the railroad partners, what we call host railroads. And so in this case, we have operating railroads, and we also have a railroad corridor owner, the North Carolina Railroad Company. So the first step to obtaining buy-in for a project like this to be added to the corridor is to work with the host railroads to perform railroad capacity modeling to identify what infrastructure improvements would be necessary to support the service. So earlier this year, GoTriangle, NCDOT, the State Department of Transportation, and North Carolina Railroad Company entered into an agreement with Norfolk Southern for Norfolk Southern to perform that railroad capacity modeling, and that work is now underway. That's a key piece of this phase of the feasibility study that we're working on now. And the intent of that is to identify what that package of infrastructure improvements would need to be in order to support the service to move this forward into implementation.
Thanks, Katharine. The next question goes to Monica, and there's also a follow-up that I want to ask Jay. Monica, how often are trains planned to be run, and over what hours?
So the current thinking about what we call opening day, which would be the service that would exist at the beginning, is 40 trains a day, 8 in each direction in the morning. That's a total of 16 trains, 8 round trips, again, 16 trains in the afternoon peak, and 4 trains in the middle of the day, 4 trains after the peak period. So that's 16 and 4 times 2, that gets you 40. There would be potential for trains to be distributed differently or for there to be more trains in the future. but there needs to strike a balance for opening day. So it's not too little that it doesn't get the job done for people, but it's not too much that operating expenses are being incurred before there's time to build ridership.
Thanks, Monica. And the follow-up, Jay, that I want to ask you is, as time goes on, more lifestyles emerge that do not rely as heavily on 9 to 5 or cars. How are we planning for expanded levels of service to match those patterns?
That's a really great question. And what I would say is, as Monica mentioned, as part of, we have a baseline of service that we are working through the study right now and trying to get answers on. We're also, as Monica mentioned, looking at different levels that might provide more trips throughout the day. And then also something that was alluded to is in the future, if we proceed with the project, there may also be the opportunity in some number of years in the future to add more trains or to change the service pattern. And then thinking a little bit differently, one of the other things that's really important, regardless of the level of service we're able to offer, is making sure that the trains are able to complement the bus network so that we really have a seamless transit network in the triangle. So it's easy to take a bus to transfer to a train, or maybe you park and ride on one end, and then take a micro transit or a Uber or Lyft to your final destination on the other end. Along with that, both those geographic connections, there's also the opportunity for buses to help provide that service throughout the middle of the day when traffic congestion is a little bit less. So even if there's a gap in service between trains, there may be a bus that can still get you back to your car or to whatever destination you need to get to.
Thanks, Jay. This next question goes to Katharine, and it switches over to a slightly more technical topic. Will this project include grade separating all of the crossings in Raleigh and Cary?
Great question. So within the corridor today, there are a number of grade separation projects that the North Carolina DOT has already identified and are funded and are moving forward. So as we think about this project, we're assuming that those will continue and that those will be built. Our analysis in this phase of feasibility is looking at whether there are other locations throughout the corridor beyond those that have already been prioritized for separation that may warrant separation as part of this project. So that's something we don't have a clear answer to now. Our phase 1 work assumed that we would not have any new grade separations created as a result of the project, but that's something that we're looking into in more detail in this phase of feasibility as we do a screening of the whole corridor, looking for areas that might warrant that. So we should have more information on that coming out of the work we're doing now, and that would be looked at further in the environmental analysis phase if the project moves forward.
Thanks, Katharine. This next question goes to you as well. How can members of the public support the project?
Participating in events like this is a great way to learn about the project. We also have a lot of information that has already become available on the project website, readyforrailnc.com, and we encourage everyone who's interested to sign up as a commuter rail insider to get alerted when new information becomes available and get invitations to events like this in the future. As we come out of this phase of feasibility study, the decision makers, the elected officials in the counties and at the MPO boards and GoTriangle's board will be asked to make a decision, or will be considering a decision on whether and how to move forward with the project for implementation. So that's communicating with those elected officials that represent you is a great way to stay involved and express support or concern about the project.
Thanks, Katharine. I've got a few more questions for you. I'm going to try and combine these next two. The questions refer to double tracking the corridor. First off, will the corridor or will the project require 2 tracks in the corridor or more than 2 tracks in the corridor? And how will that multi-tracking, if you will, work with freight service?
I'm sorry, was that a question for me?
Yep, that's for you.
Yes. So we are assuming right now that the project will build a second track where there's only 1 track today. The majority of this corridor is a single main line today, which is sufficient to support the freight service and the intercity service that's out there now, but not sufficient to support the level of commuter rail service that is proposed. So we came into this phase of feasibility assuming that there will need to be double track. We are working now with that railroad capacity modeling study I mentioned earlier, working to validate that assumption with the host railroads and confirm what the full suite of infrastructure needs would be.
Thanks, Katharine. This next question goes to Jay. Jay, the planned Raleigh BRT system includes rezoning for transit-oriented development. How are we working with our partners to plan for TOD in relation to the commuter rail?
Thanks. It's a really great question, and I think an important one as we move forward and our region continues to grow at the pace that it is. Right now, as part of this early phase feasibility study, we are coordinating with the municipalities and with Triangle J Council of Governments to understand the current state of different land use and zoning plans in the station areas. And then if this project were to move forward, it would be likely that we would work with them, with municipalities along the corridor, to support them as they understand as they work to understand the best uses in their station areas. So in Raleigh, which is adopted or is in the process of adopting TOD zones for its BRT stations, we'd hope to work with them similarly in commuter rail stations. One example one community that's gotten ahead of this is Morrisville. Morrisville has recently adopted station area plans for the proposed station there to go ahead of anticipated growth. So that's something that we would, as each municipality is ready and as this project moves forward, we would continue to do and really dive into the details should this project move forward.
Thanks, Jay. Katharine, I've got a question for you about station platforms. How are we looking at the various platform types? Can you explain to us a little bit about the different kinds of platforms and how will we navigate those types of decisions?
Matthew, is the question about high level and low level platforms?
Yeah, it is. What are the differences between those two? Can you tell us a little bit more about them and how we're navigating decisions about each?
Sure, absolutely. So today in the corridor, we have 3 Amtrak stations in the part of the North Carolina Railroad corridor that we're looking at. There are stations today at Durham, Cary, and Raleigh. In Raleigh, there's a high-level platform where passengers are able to cross directly from the platform into the train at the same height. The height of the platform is the same as the height of the inside of the train, so there's no steps. And people can just walk on, or if you're using a mobility device, just roll onto the train at that location. The reason that that's possible at Raleigh Union Station is because there's a dedicated station track that only the passenger trains use at that location. The station is separate from the freight main line that runs east and west past the station. At Durham and Cary today, there are low-level platforms. And so for passengers to enter the Amtrak trains there, there's a set of stairs within the vehicle that you climb up. Or if a passenger needs mobility assistance, there's station-based lifts. So for the commuter rail project, we're looking at various types of platform configurations and accessibility solutions. One option would be level boarding, like what's at Raleigh Union Station, although that would require dedicated station tracks separate from the freight main line in order to provide that at additional stations. We're also looking at options that provide better access than station-based lifts. Other options for that include what's called a mini high platform, where a portion of the platform is at that higher level, and a bridge plate is extended from the vehicle out to that location to provide very easy boarding, quick boarding for individuals using mobility devices or needing other assistance. And we're also looking at car-borne lifts that are on each vehicle and can provide assisted access to each vehicle on the train. That combination of mini high platforms and car-borne lifts is a relatively common solution for commuter rail systems that operate in shared corridors with freight, just because of the difficulty, complexity, operationally, cost associated with providing dedicated station tracks and a high-level platform at each station along the line. So a number of systems, Sunrail is one that uses a combination of mini high platforms and car-borne lifts as their solution to having low platforms in that shared corridor. But there are other systems that operate primarily in dedicated passenger corridors, where they are able to provide high platforms, but that would be a more complex solution for this corridor. So we are looking at all that in this phase of study, and to the question of how, how do we decide? That's some of the information that we'll be bringing to our partners to support decision-making on that, to confirm the project concept that moves forward from this phase of feasibility into implementation if that decision is made next year to move forward.
Thanks, Katharine. I've got a series of questions that I want to ask Monica about things that we typically see at commuter rail stations around the country. After I ask Monica these questions, we're going to take a little bit of a break, and I think we've got a poll for our attendees. But Monica, let's start with these questions. Can you talk a little bit about ticketing systems that we see at typical commuter rail stations? What kinds of ticketing options are there? And are there mobile ticketing systems, for instance?
Sure. Many transit agencies have a goal of getting away from cash. Cash is, it's money that people have, that conductors, for example, have to carry. It can create unsafe situations. There's a whole bunch of reasons, some good reasons to not have cash accumulating on a train. So mobile ticketing has definitely been evolving that way. The same way that people could have had a paper ticket in their wallet, but being able to flash a pass, a one-way or a monthly, like from a smartphone, is very popular now. Both popular with passengers who don't have to worry about buying a paper ticket and keeping track of it, and did it come in the mail, showing it on their phone. So that's definitely kind of state of the practice right now. And it felt like there was another part of the question that maybe I didn't answer, but is that what
Nope,
you're
you
getting
did.
at? Okay.
I want to thank you for that valuable information about what we see around the country with commuter rail systems. I just want to remind our attendees that we're not quite at the point in the process where we make those decisions. And we will take a variety of factors into consideration when we make those decisions. The next question, Monica, I have for you about what you've seen at systems around the country on commuter rail, especially at commuter rail stations. How do agencies plan for safety and security at stations, station lighting, things of that nature?
Sure. Lighting, as you say, is one thing that is a definite part of it. CCTV is in use in several systems, so that, someone's watching. There's also, those are kind of security things, but from a safety point of view, fencing and warning strips, like the bumpy yellow strip that you might see at the end of a platform, is designed to help everyone, and especially people with visual impairment, understand that they're close to the edge of a platform. So there's a number of kind of treatments that are incorporated into station design that are thoughtful about that. With respect to security and safety around the station, again, like a well-lit parking lot, clear signage, helping people understand where and where not to walk, are all part of those kinds of considerations.
Thank you, Monica. Now I'd like to take a short break, and I believe we have a poll for our attendees. It may have just popped up on your screen. If you'll just take a minute and complete that poll, we'd like to know, what station areas would you be most likely to use? All right, while the results of that poll are being tabulated, let's continue on with our Q&A. I just have results on the screen. Let me take a look. Very interesting. All right, now let's continue on with the Q&A. The next question goes to Jay Heikes, and it's about walkable and bikeable communities near park and rides. Jay, how will parking be accommodated in a way that doesn't interfere with that walkability and bikeability in station areas?
Sure. So I think there's really two pieces to addressing that. One is the specific station layouts, which is something that GoTriangle will work with each municipality on as if the project were to move forward into project development, and making sure that there are good access, safe, comfortable, convenient access for both people on foot, on bike, possibly also things like e-bikes or electric scooters or whatever other mobility devices people might use. And that's something that we accommodate in the station. We make sure that, or accommodate in station plans that make sure that all those uses are accommodated. And the second piece sort of expands beyond the station into what we were talking about earlier about transit-oriented development and making sure that the areas that are built around the stations, this is really in the ballpark of each municipality, but GoTriangle as the project sponsor, what could help coordinate study and plan development to make sure that, or to help encourage development of compact, walkable, bikeable communities that can benefit from the stations, particularly in areas where there's not development today. What I can also say is with specific respect to parking, we'd want to make sure that it's a push-pull. There's a lot of benefit by giving folks the option to leave their car and ride the train, particularly environmental benefits, as well as time-saving benefits and cost savings. But also we want to make sure that the parking doesn't get in the way of creating those compact, walkable communities around the station. So there's it's a balance to strike, and it has to be struck on a case-by-case basis.
Thanks, Jay. I have a follow-up question about parking. I actually want to direct this one to Katharine. Katharine, this question is about parking decks. Can you talk a little bit about the possibility of parking decks instead of parking lots? What factors into a decision like that? Will GoTriangle look to own the parking lots adjacent to the stations where possible? And if so, will GoTriangle be considering parking decks instead of more parking lots?
So the project's definition currently assumes parking lots at those locations where we would be planning for park and ride. As part of this phase of the feasibility study, one of the key pieces is evaluating land availability for those parking lots. As many on this call may know, there are some of the station areas that are very much built up already, and it may be difficult to identify property that's suitable, affordable for developing parking lots. So as part of this phase of study, we want to make sure that there actually is land available to provide parking at the stations we're envisioning for park and ride, or kind of inform our plans for moving forward. When we think about parking lots versus parking decks, there's two primary items that come to mind. One is cost. Building a parking deck is significantly more costly upfront than building a surface parking lot. And the second is future flexibility. There are many systems around the country where they have parking lots that were very important to providing an opportunity for connections early on in the project when the project opens, but over time as station areas develop, there's a lot more opportunity for walk-up access, and park and ride lots can be underutilized over time. And if it's a surface parking lot, that provides the opportunity for easier redevelopment into a more productive use in the future. So if we were to build a parking deck up front, that's a very long-term commitment in addition to being costly up front. So it's something we would consider very carefully and would be working with the local government partners in each jurisdiction along the line to consider as we move the project forward.
Thank you, Katharine. I'm actually going to direct this next question back to you because it's related. As the design of the commuter rail project progresses, as our work on commuter rail progresses, what steps will we take to prevent the kind of cost expansion that we've seen related to similar new stations in places like New York and Boston?
Sure. In this phase of feasibility, we're really focused on those items that can be significant drivers of cost or affect project viability. But from the standpoint of cost and protecting against cost increases, really having budget control for the project, the primary tool that we have at this point in the project is to get a good understanding of the full scope of what will be required. So working with those host railroad partners that I mentioned earlier to determine early on upfront what the infrastructure requirements will be so that we can put a good cost estimate around that. As well as looking into things like the land availability for park and ride, land availability for a maintenance facility, and other items like that that can, if not identified early, can cause increases in your cost estimate as the project moves forward. So in this phase, we've worked hard with our local government partners to identify a pretty long list of items that that we think are important to address up front, so we have a good picture before the decision is made on whether to move forward or not, what that ultimate cost of the project might be. And then if the project does move forward, we would be employing strategies along the way to do what we can to work with local government partners, the state, the host railroads, to ensure that if we do identify items that are unanticipated, that we're able to address those in the most cost-effective way possible as we move forward.
Thanks, Catherine. This next question is for Jay, and it's about affordable housing. Jay, as the project progresses, excuse me, there's a fire truck outside. As the project progresses, how will we work with our partners to ensure that existing affordable housing stays affordable? And how are we working with our partners now on policy related to affordable housing?
Those are really good and really important questions. As was mentioned in the presentation, we have worked on that. TJ Cog produced a study that really took stock of the affordable housing, both what's called naturally occurring affordable housing, which is housing that has rents that are currently affordable, meeting federal affordability thresholds, and then also what's called legally binding affordable housing. And that's really the first step, is taking stock and understanding what's there. GoTriangle itself is a transportation agency. We do not have the ability to build housing, but transportation and housing are really connected to one another. And we will, as is being done with the Raleigh BRT, as part of the TOD study, there are strategies, both in terms of building new housing, helping preserve existing affordable housing, and then also strategies to help keep people in their homes, whether they're renters or owners, and whether that's through a rental program or through property tax assistance or some other form. Raleigh has strategies specifically, or is developing strategies specifically for transit station areas. Both Raleigh and Wake County, as well as the city and county of Durham, have also recently passed housing bonds to help fund some of those strategies. We know the need is greater. And as part of a rail project, we have the opportunity, as we're acquiring land for stations or thinking about future development that might happen on a parking lot or next to a parking lot, there's also opportunities to land bank for future affordable housing. So that's one of the direct ways that a project could do this. Seattle region, for instance, the regional transit agency there has adopted policies that affordable housing is included anytime that the transit agency has extra land. And that those are things that we could look at and work with our municipalities. So sort of a long answer. GoTriangle, to sum up, GoTriangle would continue to work with our municipal partners, especially in terms of helping identify and provide support on best practices from around the country. And then one final thought that's related to that is, we have affordable housing challenges in our region, but we also have affordable transportation challenges. AAA has pegged the cost, the median cost of a car ownership at around $10,000. And our region's really spread out. So people are spending a lot of money on gas, a lot of money on maintenance, oil changes, what have you. And a regional project that connects people to job centers may help some families out by being able to spend less on gas, or maybe go from having 2 cars to 1 car. And that also helps with affordability. And we see the rail project and making sure there's good connections to it, whether you're walking, biking, or riding a bus, is really integral to the larger affordability picture. Oh, you're on mute, Matthew.
Sorry about that. It was bound to happen at some point. What I was saying is we've got a lot of questions tonight, and thank you, Jay. We've got a lot of questions tonight about safety. This next question is about safety, and I want to direct it toward Monica. Monica, can you talk a little bit about how systems across the country address crossing protection, safety at crossings, to protect people who are trying to cross the tracks?
Sorry. Yeah, so grade crossing protection is a key thing in a lot of places. It's actually very heavily prescribed by the Federal Railroad Administration. Safety is typically a function of some physical characteristics, noise like a horn blowing from the train, or warning devices, signage, and the physical can be fencing, can be a sort of bumpy strip that's not a technical term, but that helps a driver or a pedestrian understand that they're approaching a crossing. Like it's a combination of things. In general, in heavily used areas where of great frequency, there's a greater awareness of trains. It actually can be more dangerous in places where trains are infrequent or unpredictable. But in a heavily developed area like this one, we would have the maximum treatments, warning device, arms or gates that come down, sound, lights, kind of the full treatment of things that would make it very difficult to not realize there could be a train and create some deterrence.
Thank you, Monica. That seems similar in many ways to some of the things that we see here in the Triangle today. And we'll take a lot of the factors that you mentioned into consideration when we make those decisions at a later stage. This next question is actually about legal agreements. And I'm going to direct this question to Katharine. Katharine, has GoTriangle executed agreements with NCRR, Norfolk Southern, and CSX to permit commuter rail on the corridor? And how will GoTriangle navigate those legal agreements?
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, we do have an agreement in place with NCDOT, NCRR, and Norfolk Southern to complete the railroad capacity modeling for the corridor. That is a first step type of agreement that's necessary to identify the scope of the project and really identify whether there is a feasible solution from an infrastructure standpoint that can support the service in a way that's sufficiently reliable for the freight trains, the intercity trains, and then the proposed commuter service. So that's a foundational agreement that is in place, and that work is underway now, as I mentioned earlier. So coming out of this phase of feasibility, if the project is moving forward, we would at that point be working towards getting those operating and construction agreements in place with the host railroads, ultimately to move it forward. Those would be necessary as the project moves through design and prepares for construction. So those are not typically in place this early. We've got to get through this feasibility phase and that capacity study to set us up for that negotiation, those conversations around those next step agreements.
Thanks, Katharine, for that information on how we'll navigate those legal agreements. This next question is going to go to, excuse me. This next question is going to go back to you, Katharine, and it's a question about policy. Policies about the cost of parking, policies about fares. How will those decisions be made as we get further along in this process?
Sure. The GoTriangle Board of Trustees sets those types of policies for GoTriangle services. So, for example, our fare policy today is set by for our bus service is set by the GoTriangle board. So we are in this phase evaluating potential fare structures, looking at systems around the country and the various fare structures that exist out there for commuter rail today for consideration. Decisions like parking pricing and fare for service usually are determined fairly close to opening day so that they can be based on kind of the most recent information available at the time. But we do want to have some good foundational information available around those choices early on in the project. So we look at how those policies are set around the country, and we also evaluate local considerations. With respect to parking pricing, there are many systems around the country that don't charge anything for parking at stations, and then there are some that do. And so we would be looking at our local factors, working with our local government partners to evaluate the options for that as we move forward.
Thank you, Katharine. And this next question is going right back to you. It's a question about potential plans for expansion of commuter rail service in the Triangle in the future. The question is, are there plans to expand commuter rail from downtown Raleigh to Northeast Raleigh? And how would we work with our partners to make any sort of plans for expansion of commuter rail service happen?
Sure. So in phase one of this phase of this feasibility study that we're in now, we looked at the potential for commuter rail service in the East-West North Carolina Railroad Company corridor, all the way from Mebane on the west to Selma on the east. The first phase of study identified the geography that Brigetta walked through earlier this evening as appropriate for advancing for phase one, likely to be competitive for federal funding as a first phase. But there's always the potential for future extension west and east as the region grows and as there is interest in making those extensions. With respect to extension outside of that east-west corridor that exists today, that's the North Carolina Railroad Company corridor, the State Department of Transportation right now has received a federal grant to support purchasing the corridor called the S line that runs north from Raleigh Union Station through North Raleigh and actually all the way up to the state line. Virginia, the state of Virginia in the past couple of years has acquired that line in Virginia and is working on a significant expansion of service potentially for the kind of high-speed rail corridor and additional commuter rail service in northern Virginia. And so now North Carolina is working on acquiring that next piece from Raleigh to the state line. North Carolina DOT is doing a transit-oriented development study around that corridor now. There will be more information about potential future planning for that corridor available probably in the coming year-plus timeframe from that. The long-range plans for the Triangle do include commuter rail service in that north-south corridor in addition to the east-west corridor. So as we move forward, there will be further study looking at those expansion of that geography.
Thanks, Katharine. Jay, I've got a series of questions for you. This next one is about affordable housing, which has been a really popular topic tonight. This person wants to know how we're working together with Raleigh in particular on affordable housing initiatives, affordable housing planning related to commuter rail, but also station areas more generally.
That's a good question. GoTriangle, as the regional transit agency, does coordinate some land use study, but it's particularly on the project we're working on. So GoTriangle is not directly involved with the affordable housing work in Raleigh. However, it is something that we do follow and would expect to build on should we move forward with commuter rail. The same is true in Durham and other communities along the line. We also work closely with one of our partners, regional partners, the Triangle J Council of Governments, who has staff that support regional affordable housing efforts. They were the ones that worked on the affordable housing study for the rail corridor. And they've also worked with Raleigh and other Wake County communities to do similar studies for the BRT corridors. So we'd likely continue that partnership and draw on some of that expertise as we move forward with this project.
Thanks, Jay, for that answer on affordable housing. I've got a follow-up question. You brought up affordable transportation a while back. Do you know how much it costs to own and maintain a vehicle every year? About how much?
I believe the last figures I saw are from a couple of years ago, that AAA, American Automobile Association, publishes this periodically, and I believe it was close to $10,000 is the average. So obviously some are going to be a little bit less, some are going to be more. And it also depends on how much you have to drive that vehicle, both as it relates to gas and maintenance.
Thanks. And we do have a lot of questions tonight also about parking those vehicles. This next question to you, Jay, is why is parking needed at commuter rail stations at all if they'll be integrated into our transit system, into our bus system?
I think that's a good question. And 4 of the stations, 3 of the stations are not proposed to have parking. Those are the ones in downtown Durham, downtown Raleigh, and the one that's also on the campus of North Carolina State University. For the other stations, the amount of parking will sort of depend on the context in each community's needs. So some stations will have more parking than others. So the end of line station, for instance, whether it's in Auburn or Clayton, might have a very large parking lot so that folks are able to come from a larger area and access the rail corridor. And we think it's important to provide multiple modes of access, and also depends on the, or based on the local context. Someone's coming from Johnston County into Raleigh, giving them an opportunity to avoid traffic on 40 or avoid having to pay for gas also is beneficial. But also we want to make sure that we have good non-auto options as well, particularly in places where there are communities or future transit supportive communities planned around the stations.
Thanks, Jay. I've got a question for Katharine about traffic studies, and Monica, don't be afraid to chime in on this one as well. The first part of the question is, will traffic studies be done to assess the impact of commuter rail on traffic? And the second piece of the question that we have here is, can you tell us a little bit about some of the parts of a traffic study? Just what it is, what goes into it, and what are the outcomes of it. I'm going to pass that to Katharine, and then Monica, if you want to chime in, please feel free to do so.
Thanks. So the answer is yes, there are and there will be traffic studies as part of the commuter rail project's development. In this phase of study, we've identified 2 areas that are that warrant some early analysis on a variety of engineering disciplines. Traffic is one of them. That's downtown Durham and downtown Cary. The reasons for that are those are relatively congested areas. They have existing Amtrak stations that have some impacts on traffic. And there's some complicated interfaces between the rail corridor and the roadway network in those 2 areas. So Monica's team is doing some traffic studies now for those 2 areas. Those results are anticipated to be available to be presented early next year. So look out for that if that's an interest for you. We also, if the project moves forward beyond this phase of feasibility into the environmental analysis project development phase, at that point, there would likely be some further traffic studies performed potentially for other areas throughout the corridor where we would want to assess the impacts of the commuter service on traffic. So typically a traffic study looks at the existing traffic network, the traffic network in the future without the project and the traffic network in the future with the project, and compares the operations for vehicles under those cases to identify what the impacts are, and then identifies if there are impacts, identifies potential for mitigation. Monica, is there anything you would add to that?
Well, the traffic study is actually somewhat similar to what you described when you talked about rail network modeling. There are industry standard tools that basically simulate it. A computer replicates what would be going on in the roadway network and the cars. So you can see what happens with volumes and that behavior, and you can test what would happen if you made adjustments to timings or where the turning lane was, how long a turning lane, et cetera. So it's basically a computer analysis with those inputs that guide the answer.
Thank you both on that one. This next question is an interesting one. It's about sidewalks and bike lanes. The person says, I live near the Ellis Road stop, and I was wondering how the commuter rail will be connected to the surrounding housing. I know that's an area that is growing rapidly. Right now, there aren't a lot of sidewalks or bike lanes to get to the planned stop. And the question is, first, who's responsible for those sidewalks and bike lanes, and how will we work together with our partners as part of this project to make sure those connections are made? And I'm going to ask that question to Jay and also Katharine, if you want to chime in on that one.
Sure. I think there's a couple of layers to that. The first is the station access itself. So for instance, in the example of Ellis Road, making sure that there is a connection to public street Ellis Road from the station, whether it's a multi-use path or sidewalk and bike lanes. That's something that would be part of the commuter rail project. A second piece is filling in sidewalk gaps where there's already existing development. It's common for projects of this size for the transit agencies such as GoTriangle to work with our local government partners to identify some of those strategic infrastructure needs like sidewalk gaps or multi-use paths or bike lanes or street connections to help better connect the station to the surrounding neighborhoods. So that's something that we would envision doing as this project moves forward, working in partnership with local governments. And the third thing is for areas that are either expected to experience development or redevelopment, making sure that there are good rules on the books so that when new development comes in, that they provide good connections to their neighbors and ultimately to the station area.
All right, the next question is going to be about fares again. We've already talked a little bit about fare policy and how those decisions are made. And I'm going to rephrase this question slightly to get to a slightly different aspect of what we talked about. How has GoTriangle worked with its partners in the past on fare policy to integrate our fare structures with the structures of other agencies? And I'd like to pass that question along to Katharine, but also Jay, feel free to chime in as well.
Sure. So right now, GoTriangle is operating with zero fare, and that is in conjunction with all of the transit agencies in the region who made the decision together during the pandemic to suspend fares, and that decision was made to continue that fare suspension through this current fiscal year. It was very important to all of us to partner on that decision, and we'll be working together looking at that for FY23. We prior to the pandemic, when we were all charging fares, we've made a lot of effort to integrate our fare media and align our pass structure to be similar across the agencies. We don't all charge the same amount for fare, but we've had a joint fare policy working group involving the agencies that charge fares to look at ways to make the fare structure easier to understand for the customer and more consistent across the agencies. A big piece of that, which the public hasn't really seen yet, is the collaboration that went into selecting the approach for mobile payment for fares that has not gone into effect because of the suspension that's ongoing, but is something that we all worked together on to ensure was very unified, seamless fare payment structure for customers across the Triangle. Jay, is there anything you'd add to that?
No, I think you've covered it.
Thanks, y'all. We've got several questions here about funding. And Katharine, I'm going to direct these to you and try to combine them a little bit. The first question is about the infrastructure bill. What impact, if any, will the recently passed national infrastructure bill have on this project? For example, will it increase the chances of getting more federal funding?
Yeah, so the recently passed bill has a significant amount of money in there for rail as well as transit. And so that availability does make it more likely and more potential for a quicker federal funding for projects in the corridor. North Carolina DOT has received significant federal grants in the past for investments within this corridor that have supported the project and kind of make it easier for this project to be built because some improvements have already been made. North Carolina Railroad Company has also made investments in the corridor of a similar that are similar to that that would be able to be built upon by the commuter rail project. So more funding at the federal level for projects like that would be able to be directed to the rail component of the corridor, as well as more funding for transit, are very positive for the project. Another thing I would add to that is that there's plenty of funding in that bill for bus transit as well. And because of what we talked about earlier with the transit plans in the 3 counties supporting all of these modes of transit that we're talking about, having availability of federal funding for bus projects can also help, because it can serve to extend the reach of the local transit tax dollars for those bus projects. One example of that is GoTriangle has a federal grant for that Raleigh Union Station bus facility project that Brigetta mentioned in the presentation. So we're able to match our local sales tax dollars with that federal grant to build a better bus facility at that location.
Thank you, Katharine. And I want to sort of shift over to some questions about our buses, regional buses and local buses, bus connectivity. But before I do that, can you just remind us a little bit about the financial plan and how it's evolved for this project? I know as a federal project, we have to have that financial plan. How are decisions about that financial plan being made?
So right now, the project's financial plan assumes 50% of the funding would be sought through a federal discretionary grant program that's administered by the Federal Transit Administration, and the remaining 50% would be funded by the dedicated taxes for transit in the counties, so in Durham and Wake counties. The question of whether Johnston County would be participating in the first phase of construction is one that's still being investigated as part of this phase of work. So that's a question mark that we'll hope to answer as we move this phase of study forward. As far as the decision making goes, in general, for the counties where there is dedicated taxes for transit that are administered through that transit plan, it's the governing bodies that vote on those plans that will need to vote on the financial plan to fully fund the project. So That's the county commissions, the MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization boards, as well as GoTriangle's board. And then, as I mentioned, we're also working with Johnston County and Johnston's Board of Commissioners on that Clayton Johnston County piece.
Thanks, Katharine. And Jay, I want to direct this next question to you about bus connectivity. We've got an attendee that works at UNC, and they're aware that the commuter rail project is not connecting directly to UNC, but there is a stop at Ellis Road. And this attendee is wondering, how in the future, as we plan bus service, obviously we're GoTriangle, we plan regional bus service. How would we work on planning bus connections for someone who may want to ride into the Ellis Road station or another station for that matter, and connect to a destination that's not in the corridor?
Sure. So the rail service, just by nature of the existing corridor, would connect to 3 of our local transit systems: Go Durham, Go Cary, and Go Raleigh. Also connects to 2 of our university systems, Duke Transit and North Carolina State. So there's opportunities at multiple points where there are lots of buses that will be able to connect at stations, and even at other stations along the line. There'll be 1 or 2 bus routes, or perhaps microtransit service, or a dial ride type service to help connect people via transit. Thinking a little bit more globally beyond the commuter rail project, one more piece there before I move on. There's also a connection, Brigetta mentioned this in one of the slides. We're working on a relocation of our regional transit center, which is where all of our regional buses, those that go to UNC, to Raleigh, to Apex and Cary, as well as the airport. Today, we're relocating that transit center, or proposing to relocate that transit center to be adjacent to the commuter rail station. So not only would you be able to connect to local buses at various stations, we'd also have these regional connections, both at that station and then in places like downtown Durham, Cary, and Raleigh. And thinking a little bit more globally, the commuter rail project is one corridor. As Katharine alluded to, there are long-range regional plans and other high capacity transit projects being proposed, such as future BRT corridors and those long-range plans. So for instance, connecting Chapel Hill to Durham, and connecting Chapel Hill to RTP are corridors that show up in those plans as well. And if you're interested, there is an ongoing planning process right now. It's coming to a conclusion, but it's out for public comment. And that is our 2050 Metropolitan Transportation Plan. And that is overseen by 2 organizations that are collections of local governments that make transportation decisions. And those are called the Metropolitan Planning Organizations. And we can share information on how to participate in those processes that include those long-range plans for additional rail lines, as well as bus rapid transit and bus service.
Thanks, Jay. I know that through the Wake Transit Plan, for instance, investments are being made in bus rapid transit and rapid bus. Can we talk a little bit more about how we might, make connections to those investments as well as part of this project?
Sure. So the current Wake Transit Plan runs through 2030. It includes several bus rapid transit investments that would connect to commuter rail at various places, including Raleigh Union Station, which would provide connections to potentially multiple bus rapid transit routes that could connect people to Northern Raleigh out to Wake Med. The Western BRT line would also connect at Cary Depot, or the future Cary multimodal facility, and provide that opportunity to change between services. And then also there's an ongoing study right now that would extend that bus rapid transit service towards Morrisville and RTP, as well as towards Garner and Clayton. So there's opportunities for multiple services to connect and provide quick first and last mile connections. I think another thing to know about the Wake Transit Plan is from its implementation starting in 2017 and then moving into the first 10 years and now into 2030, there'll be a tripling of bus service in the first few years of that plan. So there's a lot of bus service planned, particularly in Wake County.
Thanks, Jay. And Katharine, I want to direct this question to you. I know that a lot of the trains in the corridor today are not powered by overhead catenary, overhead electrical systems, but we've made a lot of great investments lately in bus technology. And I was wondering if you could talk about some of those bus investments.
Sure. A number of agencies in the region have recently started to incorporate electric buses into our fleets. GoTriangle has 2 electric buses that we have now, and we have plans to purchase a few more in the coming years. That question earlier about how the recent federal legislation would affect funding availability for things. There's anticipated to be significant amount of funding available for electric bus purchases coming from that, as well as other federal programs going into the future. So we're all beginning to test those out and see how they can be efficiently incorporated into our fleet. Electric buses are significantly more costly than diesel powered buses. So at least from an upfront purchase perspective. So there's some work we have to do to identify funding to ensure that we can continue to incorporate those into our fleets as we move forward. With respect to electrifying trains and electric locomotives, I think there's maybe been some interest in that we've heard as well. The technology on that is a little behind, or will be further in the future. So we are beginning to look into that, working with our consultants to track the market, track the availability of electrified vehicles for the corridor, and beginning to think about ways that we could preserve availability or preserve our ability to make investments in electric locomotives potentially in the future, even if they're not available or the technology is not quite there at the time that this project is ready to get started. So we are very mindful of future proofing, and we are also very mindful of wanting to ensure that technologies are well proven and going to be reliable for the service for this investment. That is one issue that a number of the local agencies have been having with electric buses. The availability of those buses has not quite been as good as availability of our diesel buses. So we want to ensure that we have good reliability for the customer. So really need to kind of keep an eye on that technology as it progresses in the coming years.
Thanks, Katharine. I've got one last question, and I want to direct it to all 3 of our panelists. And panelists, please feel free to take some time to think about this question. It's sort of a broader, more philosophical question, and it's a simple one. The question is, why commuter rail? What is the purpose of the commuter rail project? Why do we need commuter rail? And I'd like to start with Katharine, then go to Monica and Jay. But if you'll just think about it for a minute, and just like from your own perspective as an expert in this industry, why commuter rail? What's the purpose for it, and why do we need it? Katharine.
Sure, happy to start on that. This is a rapidly growing region that has identified a need for high capacity transit for decades. I think someone had in the chat a few minutes ago that a project like this has been contemplated for over 20 years, and the region has only been growing and is anticipated to continue to grow in the future. We know that pre-pandemic and even now during the pandemic, traffic on I-40 is difficult to navigate during peak periods. So an investment in high capacity transit that can provide a reliable alternative to driving on our congested roadways really, I think, is the primary purpose, to be able to support continued economic growth in the region and support access to all of those jobs and all of those opportunities as an alternative to driving a car.
Thanks, Katharine. Monica, from your perspective,
Well,
why
when
commuter
you-
rail?
when you have an existing railroad asset in the corridor, it's kind of irresistible to uh, at least explore how to take advantage of it, if not implement it. It's not easy or cheap. It's that would be it should be clear to anyone, but it's still easier and cheaper than starting fresh, trying to create a fixed guideway like brand new. And it's also just it taps into some commuting behavior that across the country really resonates. There's lots of good bus service, but there is still a lot of evidence that people consider rail more permanent, perhaps because it is a large investment and they don't feel like it's going to be taken away. As Brigetta and other people said, the corridor is close to where people live and work. So, the why commuter rail is how can we take advantage of an existing resource here to solve the problems that Katharine outlined?
Thanks, Monica. Jay, same question for you. From the planning perspective, why commuter rail here?
And you've really put me at a disadvantage going after Monica and Katharine on that one. I think to try to not be repetitive and to add it from a planning perspective and trying to think just beyond transportation, I think it has a lot to do with access and affordability. Our region is already pretty spread out. Commuter rail offers the opportunity to provide reliable and affordable connections to places in our region where there's jobs, healthcare, opportunities for workforce training and education, opportunities for people to advance in their careers, opportunities for people to live in walkable, compact communities. Commuter rail helps connect people where they are now to those access or to access those opportunities. Excuse me. Have some dogs barking in the background here. Hopefully, it's not coming across. I think the other piece of it too is it offers us a sustainable alternative to, or offers people a sustainable alternative to being stuck and growing traffic on 147 and 40 and US 70 and our other roads in the region. Instead of burning gas or even an electric vehicle burning electricity that's still being fueled by coal, we have the opportunity to reduce VMT, reduce greenhouse gases, which we know is something that's really important to a lot of communities in our region that have adopted climate plans and important for air quality and livability as a whole.
Thanks, Jay. Yeah, I know. Just my 2 cents. That affordability piece, that sustainability, that connectivity to opportunities and jobs is something that we all need. And I think that that's going to be pretty well demonstrated through this project. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. I know that we didn't get to answer all of your questions. We will follow up with you. We will follow up on those questions. The number one thing that I can encourage you to do is go to readyforrailnc.com and sign up to be a Commuter Rail Insider. That way you'll have the inside track on this important project. The other thing I would really like to ask you to do tonight, there's going to be a short survey after the Q&A ends tonight. Well, we would love to learn more about who you are. We would love to learn more about you. So please stick around and complete that survey. Once again, thank you all so much for being here tonight. This was a lot of fun for me, and I hope it was also it was very informative for me, and I hope it was also informative for you. Have a good evening, and please stay in touch.